I'm Martin. This is the story of my trip to the North Pole to find the last polar bears. All my life I've wanted to see how polar bears really live, to see them swimming amongst the icebergs and playing in the snow. You see, I remember going to the zoo one hot summer's afternoon and seeing my first polar bear. He was sitting in the shade of a dead tree. There was a small concrete pool for him to swim in. The water was green. I looked at the polar bear. There was no snow for him to roll in, no icebergs for him to float upon. That was no life for a polar bear. I couldn't save him. How could I? You can hardly smuggle a polar bear under your coat and walk out with him, can you? Well, that day I decided I'd go to the North Pole and see how the polar bears really live. I went to the library and I read everything I could find about polar bears, where they live, what they eat, and how to look for them in remote places. I studied many maps until one day, in the British Museum, I found the map of Great Bear Ridge. I knew then that that is where I would find the last polar bears. I began to plan an expedition. I decided after a lot of thought to take Roo with me and a golf trolley as a sledge. Huskies would be better, but I couldn't afford to feed them. Roo said that her particular breed was in fact better than huskies on the snow, but that no one had ever given them the chance to prove it. When I told her that our expedition was to the North Pole, she said that she'd heard of it and she thought that one of her relations had helped to put it up. I loaded the golf trolley with everything we'd need for our journey, and we crept out of the house and set sail for the North Pole on a ship called the Unsinkable. Our cabin had 2 portholes, one for Roo and one for me. I saw a lot of seagulls and a porpoise, and Roo said she saw a sheep. Roo's not a very good sailor. She says that dogs aren't supposed to be on boats. I told her that some boats always have a cat on board to kill rats. Roo said anything a cat can do, a dog can do better. And the dogs are famous for being great sailors. She said that her grandfather was probably the captain of a ship and that he probably killed hundreds of rats. He probably did, I said. Roo asked the captain if she could have a go at steering the ship. For half an hour we went round in circles. Roo said dogs always steer ships in this way. The captain was worried about the ship hitting a rock, so he took over and we continued in a straight line toward the North Pole. It was a long way to the North Pole. We sailed through storms and high seas, and it grew colder and colder. Roo wore my socks to keep her paws warm. Every day she asked if we were there yet. Every day I had to tell her, not yet, but soon, very soon. It's a long way to the North Pole, and I needed to keep her spirits up. The sea is such a big place. Seems to go on forever. We did see some land yesterday. The captain pointed out the islands of Shetland, but he didn't stop, as he said we had to make good time if we wanted to reach the North Pole before the bad weather. Of course, I never mentioned anything about the bad weather to Roo, as I thought it might upset her. She'd been rather a nuisance, I'm afraid, and I began to wonder whether it was such a good idea to bring her along in the first place. I thought she might be useful, pulling the trolley up the steep bits. Perhaps I should have brought a husky after all. Roo announced that she'd changed her mind about finding the last polar bears and that she'd decided to go home. She said that she'd been mistaken and it wasn't snow that her particular breed were good on, it was sand. I said it was impossible to go back now and that we just had to press on. Roo said that dogs were excellent swimmers and that she could swim back if she wanted to. I had to put her lead on and tie her to the mast as I was frightened that she just might try it. She howled all afternoon until I untied her. One night, Roo insisted on sleeping in a hammock. I didn't think this was a very good idea, but she said that her grandfather had probably slept in one all the time he was at sea. I finally agreed, but I warned her not to stand up in the hammock. She ignored me completely and promptly fell out onto the floor. I wish she'd sleep in her basket like a normal dog. Later that night, the ship took a real pounding from a dreadful storm. The engine stopped completely, and when the captain tried to get it going again, nothing happened. Until Roo helped. At last we landed at a place called Walrus Bay. Hurrah! The captain wished me luck, and he gave Roo a tin of macaroni cheese. I think he really liked her. It was sad to see him go. We were welcomed into Walrus by hundreds of penguins, but no polar bears. Our cabin stood on a hill just outside Walrus. It was very dirty inside, and it seemed quite gloomy, but we soon cleaned it up. It wasn't much, but it was home. Our first night at the North Pole was very cold. Roo wouldn't sleep in her basket and got into my bed. Her paws stuck into me, and she fidgeted about so much that I hardly slept a wink. And to make matters worse, a wolf sat on our roof and howled all night. The next day, I wanted to begin our search for the polar bears, but the snow kept on falling. It snowed so much that it nearly buried our cabin. For 3 days we were cooped up, and our fuel ran low. I had to burn the chairs and Roo's basket to keep us warm. Roo was very upset about her basket. She said that she wanted to keep things in it. I said it was a pity she hadn't slept in it. Sometimes I wished I had brought a husky. I tried to sleep, but was woken by more wolves running across the roof. Roo said that she was tired of looking for polar bears and wanted to go home. At last, it stopped snowing, and I took Roo out to a place called the Gentle Slopes. There she could practice pulling the golf trolley through the snow. However, halfway up the slope, Roo decided she wanted to go down and took off, dragging my golf trolley behind her. I was so angry with Roo that when we got home I didn't speak to her for ages. In the end, she looked so sorry that I had to tell her the Great Bear Ridge ice cream story to cheer her up. Once upon a time, I told her, the snow was so pure and clean that it tasted better than the finest ice cream. But as the air got dirtier from all the chemicals and fumes, the snow lost its taste. The last of the world's ice cream lay up on the Great Bear Ridge, and that's why we were going there, to get ice cream for Roo. Roo loved this story. I told it to her many times. I must admit I added bits. The fabulous chocolate mint chip that grows in the shade, or the delicious strawberry split found only at sunset. These were my own inventions. Afterwards, Roo felt much better and said she was very keen to get up there. That afternoon, we went down to Walrus to stock up on provisions for our journey to find the polar bears. We spent a long time searching for the shops, as everything lay buried beneath the snow. Eventually, we found the mailing station after Roo fell down the chimney. I bought a pair of wellies, some fish, cheese, candles and sausages. Roo bought a picture of a rabbit, an old bone and some jam labels. I wish she wouldn't waste her money. Afterwards, I played golf on the snowfields behind Walrus. I found that golf kept my spirits up. My first shot went into the sea. The second went down one of the crevices. As I was running low on golf balls, I decided to play just one last ball before I packed it in. I took my aim at the red flag, kept my eye on the ball, and gave it a mighty thwack with my one iron. The ball rose high into the blue sky, hung still for a moment as if deciding what to do next, and then fell in a graceful arc out of sight beyond the crevices. It was a magnificent shot, and I set off after it immediately to play the next. I went carefully past the crevices because if you fall down there, you're a goner. Then, in the distance ahead, I spied a small black shape lying in the snow. As I got closer, I realized that it was a little penguin, unconscious but still alive. And beside it lay my golf ball. My ball had hit him on the head. I wrapped the penguin up in my coat, zipped it up in my golf bag, and set off back to the cabin as quickly as I could. I laid it by the stove in a cardboard box to keep warm. Roo was very annoyed and said, why didn't I invite the whole of the Arctic into our home and be done with it? We could fill the place with walruses, Arctic foxes and seabirds, and we could sleep outside. We didn't speak again that night. Hip, hip, hurrah, and 3 cheers! The next morning, the little penguin had woken up. It had a slight bump on its head, but apart from that, it was perfectly well. It ate 6 dried fish for breakfast and went back to sleep. When I went outside to get wood for the stove, it struck me that something was wrong. At first, I couldn't make up my mind what was wrong. Then I noticed the sky. One half of it was a deep blue, and the other was bright yellow. But even stranger than that was the sun and the moon. They were side by side. The sun had risen as it always does, but the moon hadn't gone where it normally goes during the day. It had stayed. I rushed back into the cabin, and then I noticed the calendar. It said that today was the 32nd of October, which couldn't be right, as October only has 31 days, and that day should be the 1st of November. Something very strange was happening, though, and I thought we should set off as soon as possible for Bear Ridge before it got any stranger. After harnessing Roo up to the trolley, I closed the door to our cabin and we set off at once towards the gentle slopes. I didn't look back in case I changed my mind. By lunchtime, we'd reached the gentle slopes and we started the long climb up. Once I looked back and saw the cabin, a tiny speck in the distance, and it brought a lump to my throat. Roo was pulling the trolley with great enthusiasm, no doubt driven along by the thought of ice cream. And so, by tea time, we were halfway up to the top. We stopped and pitched the tent, crawled inside and lit the stove. And after a large meal, we got into our sleeping bags. Penguin didn't, as he's used to sleeping without one. Disaster struck the next morning when a large gust of wind blew the tent away. We watched it float off over Blue Whale Bay. Fortunately, I'd taken the sleeping bags out earlier, or else it would have been a complete disaster. We carried on up the gentle slopes. The wind started to blow harder. I tied us all to a piece of rope so that none of us would blow away. We made slow progress. At times, Bear Ridge seemed to get closer and closer, but just as I thought we would reach it, it'd get further away again. Must be like those mirages you get in the desert. The sky changed from lilac to a deep crimson, and it started to snow. We stopped and made an igloo, cutting out blocks of snow with my one iron to make the walls. The wind grew more fierce, and we'd just finished the igloo when the storm hit. It blew the trolley right up into the air, taking Roo with it. I only just managed to catch one of the wheels with my golf club and pull her back down. I grabbed her in my arms, undid the harness, and the trolley flew off down the mountain. We were so hungry, and all our food had blown away. But then, Roo brought out the tin of macaroni that the captain had given her. What a clever dog! After eating it, we all huddled together in my sleeping bag to try and keep warm. Meanwhile, the storm got more and more fierce. In the wind, I'm sure I heard voices. I thought I heard the wolves howling. The three of us huddled together. And suddenly, the storm stopped. We all crawled out of the igloo. I only took my one iron and a few golf balls with me. We walked the last bit to the Great Bear Ridge under the warm sun. Penguin walked beside me, while Roo ran on ahead, as dogs always do. And at last, we reached the top. And then, we saw the most beautiful sight. The last polar bears were there, playing with their cubs, rolling in the snow, floating on icebergs. I've not spoken to them yet, but I will. Right now. Bye.
Do you dare to peek inside?
All new Trapped coming soon to the CBBC channel.
Christmas, eh? Time for presents, family.
Dida bo.
Yeah, turkey, crackers.
Dida fimanolo.
Yeah, mistletoe, mince pies.
Nananafi.
Yeah, sometimes bananas, Brussels sprouts.
Oh, full fida batolo.
Can't say that on television.
Wa fifa follow.
You can't say that either. Turn the camera off. I'm sorry, viewers. I'm sorry. You shouldn't have heard that. No, don't you say it again. I told you don't you say it. The Ed and Out Show, weekday afternoons on the CBBC channel. All the best bits of Christmas.
Now you put me off. We wish you a Merry
Chinmas. We
wish you a Merry Chinmas. We wish you a Merry Chinmas.
Happy New Year!
Good tidings we bring to you and your chin.
We wish you a Merry
Chinmas.
and a wahey New Year.
Happy Chinmas. On Boxing Day here on BBC One, meet a father who couldn't be closer to driving his son crazy. A Goofy movie is next.